Hi, I am Dr. Amber Lane. They called me broken, dismissed me as a mistake, and shoved me out like I didn't belong. But 9 years later, I walked into my father's ICU room and, in a crisp white coat, and introduced myself as the chief surgeon. Hello, I'm the one who saved your life. Have you ever wondered what happens when the one cast aside becomes the only one who can rescue them? What would you do if the family that wrote you off had to rely on you to survive? Now, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what's the time where you are right now? Let's connect. I was always the kid who colored outside the lines, not because I couldn't stay inside them, but because I wanted to see what happened when I didn't. In our small town outside Chicago, my sister Chloe was the golden child. Scholarships, pageants, straight A's, and the perfect fiancé. Me, I brought home science fair wins and sketches of human anatomy they shoved into drawers no one opened. My parents called it a phase. Chloe dubbed me the little loser doctor. They laughed, but I never did. By 16, I learned to stay quiet, curtains drawn for family dinners, and polite nods at church. However, inside, my real dream pulsed strong. To be a doctor, not for glamour, but for the gritty front line where no one looked twice. So, I applied for a full scholarship to a med prep program behind their backs. I mailed the acceptance letter on a frigid December morning while Chloe blasted pop music in the driveway. The day they discovered it was at my high school graduation dinner at the Grand Oak, where every cousin twirled a drink and Chloe wore her engagement ring like armor. I wore my pearls even though inside I felt anything but polished. No one toasted me, no one asked about med school. Instead, Dad cleared his throat and, with that familiar disappointed sigh, said, "Amber, you've always been a disappointment." Mom's lips pinched. Chloe sneered. "Enjoy your doctor dolls," she mocked. "A week's worth of birthday money. About $150, 0 cents in cash, was slid across the table and they walked out. No hugs, no good luck. Just silence and a cherry tart I couldn't taste. The moment I chose myself, I knew I might lose them forever. But desire to prove myself never left me. That night, I ended up at a 24-hour diner near campus, shook off the tears and spent $4 on a bowl of chicken noodle soup. No messages, no calls, just steam and solitude. The waitress refilled my water twice before I left crumpled bills and walked into the cold night. My only companions were my purse, a student ID, and a pin that read, "Future Dr. Lane." It cost $3. It was my reminder I still had a direction. I slept in my dusty silver Corolla for months. Mornings began with sneaking into the university gym to shower, then anatomy lectures. I stayed invisible. Head down, work hard, no distractions. Oddly, it worked. I made it to the top of every test and every lab, and my name became a quiet whisper of excellence. Someone to watch. That spring, Professor Kellerman pulled me aside after lab. "You have stillness," she said. "Even when everything shakes, you don't break." I nodded, not knowing if she praised my strength or warned me it could break me. The word stillness stuck. Fast forward, 3 years later, I was deep into surgical residency, scrubs clinging to late-night exhaustion, rounds at 5:30 a.m., coffee as dark as the hospital corridors. And there, in the ICU, I found her, my sister Celeste, only 2 years younger, introduced as a CNA trainee. Her red hair and freckles stood out in nursing scrubs. My pulse stuttered at first glance, but I hid it under calm professional. Our first case together was a cardiac valve repair. My first solo lead. She fumbled a clamp. I guided her fingers gently. No reprimand, only firm direction. Use the curved hemostat. She blinked, focused, and nodded. We continued. After closure, Dr. Klein, the attending, said, "Impressive composure, Dr. Lane, even when your assistant faltered." I didn't need to blush. I never flinch. That afternoon I heard her murmuring in the lounge, "Dr. Lane is so cold." Like she's better than everyone. I didn't react. I just walked away, pocketing her words like I was meant to. A week later, in ICU, I caught her hand hovering over a medication tray. Almost ready to double dose a patient, I stopped her. She snapped, "You sound like my big sister." My chest tightened. "Does your sister have a name?" I asked. She stared. "Aurelia," I said softly. She faltered, then slunk away. We stood separated by guilt and time, 200 feet of fluorescent hallway. But I didn't answer when she asked to talk. I just kept working. Then came the call, a family emergency, code blue in ICU, a trauma alert. I rushed in, scrubbed in, and saw his name on the chart, Joseph Lane, my father. My heart froze and then ignited with purposeful resolve. I led the team. "Dr. Lane, chief on this procedure," I said. Instruments passed, countless sutures, 1 heparin drip, 2 meters of tubing, 3 critical moments. We closed. He survived. When he opened his eyes, confusion, disbelief, and then the moment. You're my surgeon?" I didn't cry. I said, "Hello, Dad. I'm your surgeon." The monitor beeped. Relief. But inside me, a storm of validation, pain, triumph. My sister stood by, silent and shattered. "I didn't know," she whispered. I met her gaze. "You stopped looking." And in that moment, something shifted. Not words, but presence. Respect. Hard-earned. But the story isn't over. There's a letter I left unsigned, a badge I tore off, and the question. Does healing mean staying or walking away whole? Stay with me in the next part, because the next chapter will ask, can the wounds ever truly close when the scars run this deep? Back at the hospital, I kept my coat buttoned and my head down. Word of the surgery spread faster than infection in a closed ward. Nurses whispered, interns glanced twice. One asked if I was really that Lane, the one from that surgery. I nodded once and kept moving. Recognition had never been my fuel. Precision was. I didn't need applause, I needed clarity. That week, I filed routine notes in the admin lounge when I spotted a folder left open on the edge of the copier. The name on top made my heart stutter. Celeste Lane. Inside, a shadowing rotation schedule, a resume riddled with gaps, and a brief personal statement. Looking to rebuild after a failed engagement and a rough stretch. The honesty stung, not because of what she wrote, but because it mirrored me, except she got a second chance without sleeping in a car. I left the folder untouched. Some ghosts were better unopened. That night, in the on-call room, I stared at the ceiling tile with a dent shaped like someone's shoe. I remembered the coat closet from residency, a month-long rental in the med wing lined with extra linens. I'd squeezed between mops and bleach bottles, breathing into my scarf to stay warm. One night, after a 36-hour shift, I woke up to a janitor dropping his mop in shock when he opened the door. I'd laughed until I cried. You can't fake resilience. You can only live through it. The next morning, during rounds, Celeste trailed behind the team. She didn't speak to me, and I didn't offer her a shortcut. As we stepped into room 310, she bumped my shoulder lightly like a flicker of recognition. Or regret. Later, she passed me in the corridor and murmured, "Thanks for not humiliating me." I didn't reply. It was Friday when I opened my locker and found it. A folded drawing from when I was a kid. 7 years old, maybe. A stick figure house, names scribbled in uneven crayons. Mom, Dad, Celeste, and me. Only this time someone had scrawled in black ink beneath my name, "Family doesn't mean forever." My stomach twisted. I tucked it in my coat pocket, not out of sentiment, but survival. I had rounds to finish. By Monday, my pager buzzed mid-afternoon. Patient transfer from cardiac ICU. I glanced at the file. There it was again. Joseph Lane, readmitted for post-surgical observation. Heart complications, mild arrhythmia. When I stepped into the room, he stared at me with a mix of awe and shame. "You came," he rasped. "I was assigned," I said flatly, flipping the chart. He didn't speak. I noted his vitals, confirmed his meds, and turned to leave. "Amber," he started. I paused, one hand on the door. "I wanted to write," he said. "But your mother—" I didn't turn. "You had 9 years. You could have written a sentence." Outside the room, I leaned against the wall and exhaled. My phone buzzed. Dr. Min from Hopkins. "You still haven't filed that transfer paperwork. You okay?" she asked. "I've got one more thing to finish," I replied. And I did. I just didn't know it would involve my past blowing through the door like a storm. That afternoon, Celeste stormed into the med bay. In her hand, a billing file. My alias, R.A. Callahan, is printed across the top. She slapped it on the desk. 3 years, she said. "You paid for his meds, anonymously." I didn't respond. Why? I shrugged. "Because I knew he wouldn't." She stared at me. "We thought you hated us." I blinked. "I did. I do. But hate doesn't cancel out love. It just buries it." She stepped back like I'd slapped her. That night, I sat in my car, no longer a home but still a place of quiet. I took out an old photo. Dad and I were fishing, back when he still called me Slugger. I turned it over, blank, just memory. Then, I reached for the transfer papers. Hopkins had waited long enough. I packed them into a folder, but something held me back from signing. Maybe it was the fact that no one had apologized. Or maybe it was because sometimes the hardest cut it was emotional. Tuesday morning, I scrubbed in early. My hands moved from memory, suction, clamp. I didn't flinch, not even when I saw my father's name on the OR board. Another follow-up. He didn't know I'd be there. He didn't ask. But he didn't protest when I entered either. Post-op, he said, "You saved me again." "No," I replied. "I did my job." Celeste met me outside the ward. "He wants to talk." I shook my head. "I think we've said enough." She reached into her pocket, handed me an envelope. Inside, a single note in Dad's handwriting. I was wrong. I folded it carefully and placed it back in her hand. "I know," I said. But I still hadn't decided if forgiveness was part of my treatment plan, a final confrontation, a truth buried in medical records, and the question that haunted me most, could I heal while still carrying their scars? The following week passed with surgical precision. Early rounds, late charting, and long hours in the operating room kept me from drifting too deep into memory. It was easier to live inside anatomy than within emotion. Easier to understand a torn aorta than a fractured relationship. But emotions have a way of bleeding through, no matter how tightly you stitch them. I noticed it one morning as I passed the staff lounge. Celeste was seated at the far end, nursing a black coffee, staring blankly at her phone. She didn't look up. A month ago, I might have taken satisfaction in that distance. Now, it just felt like another open wound, and neither of us had time to dress. That same morning, a second envelope showed up in my locker. This one wasn't folded like the last. It was pristine, sealed with a small hospital emblem sticker. Inside was a printout, not of lab results, but a scanned excerpt from my first ever journal. Pages I'd lost when I left home at 18. It was unmistakably mine, my handwriting, my words. Someday, they'll see me with a badge and a title. Maybe then, I'll be enough. There was no signature, no note, no hint of who had found it, or why they'd returned it now. Just another reminder that someone was still watching. Still peeling through pieces of me I thought were buried. I folded the paper, slipped it behind the lining of my locker, and scrubbed in for a triple bypass. The patient was a retired teacher from Toledo. She gripped my hand before the anesthesia kicked in. They say women make better surgeons, steadier hands, softer hearts. I smiled behind my mask. We do our best. The procedure went well, but halfway through I heard a familiar voice behind the surgical curtain. Celeste. She was observing again under another resident's wing. I didn't flinch, didn't speak. But I caught her reflection in the metal tray as I closed the incision. She was watching, not with judgment but awe. I wondered if she realized she was witnessing the version of me they all said would never exist. Post-op, she hovered outside the scrub room. "That was incredible," she said. "You didn't even hesitate." "I've trained not to," I replied. She bit her lip and looked down at her shoes. "He cried last night, said he doesn't deserve what you've done, that none of us do." I didn't answer. I'd cried for years into the fabric of a Corolla's back seat. "He wants to apologize," she continued. "He said he's ready." I shook my head. Apologies don't undo surgeries. They don't close incisions or reset years. She looked away, blinking fast. "What do you want then?" I paused. "To stop having to explain why I survived without them." That night, I stayed late. Not for rounds, not for extra shifts, just to be in the building. Hospitals always felt like a second skin. No expectations, just facts. Lives saved or lost, no in between. I walked the quiet halls, stopped by the nurses' station, and signed off on a few final charts. Then I wandered past the ICU, past his room. The light inside was dim. I saw his shadow, back turned, hunched over. For a moment I imagined knocking, but I didn't. Instead, I walked to the rooftop, the highest point in the hospital. I stood at the edge, the wind slicing through my coat, and looked out at the city. The skyline wasn't much, just scattered lights, a few towers, and the flicker of planes overhead, but it felt like mine. All of it. Earned. I thought of the nights I'd slept in alleys, in parking lots, beside vending machines, chasing Wi-Fi to submit med school essays. I thought of the patients who held my hand tighter than any family member ever had. Of the professors who told me I had surgeon's intuition. Of Dr. Min, who said, "You bleed strength, even when you're stitched shut." I wasn't ready to leave all that behind. Not yet. But I also knew something had to give. I looked down at my badge. Dr. Elaine. Still heavier than it should have been. The next day, I finally sat across from my father. Not in a hospital room. In the family waiting lounge. We had 2 cups of coffee. From the vending machine between us, he looked older than I remembered. Fragile. Human. "I don't know where to start," he said. "Try the truth," I replied. He exhaled. "I was wrong. I was scared. You reminded me of all the parts of myself I never had the courage to chase." "That's not my burden to carry," I said. "I know." He looked up, eyes watery, but I carried the shame. Every time I saw your name in the news, in a journal, I thought, how did I get her so wrong? I didn't speak. "Celeste told me about the meds," he continued. "Why didn't you tell me it was you?" I shrugged. "Because I didn't do it for you. I did it for the man who taught me how to change a tire, who carried me on his shoulders through the snow." He nodded slowly. "I miss being that man." "So do I." We sat in silence. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like punishment. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet. A photo. We were at a softball game, him in a worn cap, me holding a trophy too big for my hands. "I used to carry this," he said. "I told people you were going to be a nurse." I almost smiled. I aimed a little higher. "You hit the moon," he said. I left the room without a handshake, without a hug. But my steps were lighter. Sometimes forgiveness isn't a grand gesture. It's walking away without bitterness. A final letter, a surgical scar that speaks louder than any apology, and the decision that changed everything. That Friday, the mailroom delivered a stack of internal memos and a single padded envelope addressed to me. No return address. Inside, wrapped in old tissue paper, was a stethoscope. Not hospital-issued, but custom, engraved faintly on the side, for the one who never quit. It wasn't new. The tubing was slightly worn and the earpieces dulled from use. I stared at it for a long time, tracing the letters with my thumb. There was no card, no explanation, just the weight of something once lost, now returned. My first stethoscope, the one I'd saved up for through weekend shifts and cafeteria jobs. I'd thought it was stolen the week I left my shared apartment. I didn't ask who found it. I didn't need to. I carried it with me the rest of the day, tucked carefully into the inner pocket of my coat like armor. During my afternoon rounds, I visited an elderly patient named Mrs. Dorsey. Her voice was raspy, but her wit was sharp. "You always this quiet?" she asked as I adjusted her IV. "No," I replied, "just selective with my words." She smirked. "That's smart. Most people talk themselves into regret." She paused, eyeing me. "You're good at this. You don't flinch." "I've had practice," I said, offering a tight smile. "Let me guess. Something made you this way. A big fall, maybe?" Her gaze was gentle, but knowing. "More like 1,000 small ones," I admitted. "I just got tired of staying down." Her hand gripped mine for a second longer than necessary. "Well, you're standing now. Don't forget that." That night, I went home and pulled out a storage box from under my bed. Inside were scraps of the person I used to be. I had old ID cards, acceptance letters, and a letter from Hopkins that I had never framed. I held it now. The paper yellowed at the corners. "We are pleased to offer you admission." I remembered reading those words while sitting in a borrowed coat at a bus stop. Snow collecting in my lap. I'd been so afraid then. Not of failing, but of succeeding and having no one to share it with. The kind of success that echoes in empty rooms. I pinned the letter to my corkboard that night, right beside a sticky note that read, "Still here." The next morning was calm. No codes, no unexpected arrivals. I made my way to the cafeteria for a rare hot breakfast. Celeste was already there, stirring sugar into her coffee alone. She looked up as I passed. "Sit?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded. We didn't talk for the first few minutes, just chewed and sipped in a silence that felt less hostile than it once had. "Mom's asking about you," she said finally. "She won't say it, but I think she's afraid you'll never come back." I shrugged. "Maybe I won't." "You don't have to forgive her," she added quickly, "but you might want to hear what I raised an eyebrow. "Kept." Celeste reached into her bag and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were things I hadn't seen in a decade. My childhood sketchbook, a paper with a gold star, a letter I'd written in 8th grade about wanting to be a trauma surgeon. "She kept this under her bed," Celeste said. "Dad didn't know." "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked. Celeste looked down. "Because I spent years believing the version of you they told me, the dropout, the disappointment, but then I saw you in the OR." Her voice cracked. "You're not that version. You never were." I closed the box gently. "Neither were you," I said. She blinked at me. "What?" "You were just scared too," I continued. "Scared of being less, scared of choosing wrong." She didn't deny it. We sat there a while longer, not as sisters, but as survivors of the same storm, just finally acknowledging the wreckage. Later that week, Dr. Min called. "The transfer offer still stands," she said, "but you need to decide soon. We've got a fellowship slot waiting and it's got your name on it." I promised to call back. But the decision wasn't as clear as I'd thought it would be. Leaving meant closing this chapter for good. Staying meant living among the people who once buried me, even if they now watched me bloom. That night, I walked the long corridor to the ICU one last time. My father was sitting up, reading a dog-eared mystery novel. He looked healthier, stronger. "Thought you forgot about me," he said with a half-smile. "Impossible," I replied. He set the book down. "I still don't deserve what you did." "It wasn't about deserving," I said. "It was about legacy and choosing who I wanted to be." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You saved me." "Yes," I said, "and now I'm saving myself." He reached for my hand. I let him. It didn't fix things, but maybe it started something. Healing isn't about returning to what was. It's about building something from what's left. One final goodbye, an unexpected patient, and the decision that redefined my future. The next morning, I arrived early. The sun hadn't even touched the parking lot yet, and the hospital's hallways still held that echo of overnight quiet. I took a seat at my desk in the resident wing, staring at the folder marked Hopkins Transfer Final. One signature. That's all it would take. I pulled out a pen but didn't move. A soft knock on the door made me look up. It was Nurse Carl again, holding a clipboard. "Dr. Lane, sorry, there's a patient asking for you by name." "By name?" "Yeah," he said, flipping through the chart. "Room 403, admitted early this morning. Some complications from a routine surgery last year. Said she read your name on the board and asked if you could see her." I frowned. That was unusual. Patients rarely asked for specific residents unless we'd treated them before. Still, I stood, slipped on my coat, and headed down the hallway. Room 403 was dim, curtains pulled tight against the morning light. I stepped in quietly. The woman in the bed turned her head. "You came," she whispered. I blinked, recognition flooding me too late. "Mrs. Linfield?" I asked. She nodded. "You treated me 2 years ago. You probably don't remember. A burst appendix. You stayed late that night." I do remember now, vaguely. Her husband had been frantic. Her vitals were unstable. "You were calm," she said. "Everyone else panicked, but you didn't. I never forgot that." I sat in the chair beside her. "How are you feeling?" "Scared," she admitted. "They're saying it might be something serious. We'll take good care of you," I said. "You're in the right place." She smiled faintly. "You always say the right things." That stuck with me. After so many years of being told I was wrong, not enough, misplaced, it mattered that someone believed the opposite. After I left her room, I walked past the family waiting lounge. Celeste was sitting alone, scrolling through her phone. She looked up when she saw me. "I didn't know you were still here," she said. "Neither did I replied. She stood. "Mom's been asking about you again, wants to talk, really talk." I shrugged. "Talking doesn't fix everything." "Maybe not," she said, "but it might help with something." "Like what?" I asked. "Like not hating ourselves every time we look in the mirror." The honesty in her voice surprised me. I looked at her, really looked, and saw someone who had also been buried under expectation and regret. "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not today." "I'll wait," she said, and walked off. Back in the resident lounge, I finally picked up the transfer form. I stared at the space for my signature, then flipped it over and wrote something else on the back. A list. Not of pros and cons, but of what I'd built here. Patients saved, mistakes learned from, relationships mended, however slightly. I thought of Dr. Min, her faith in me unwavering, of Celeste, trying to unlearn the lies, of the man in room 317, whose heart I repaired, even if I could never repair the man himself. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my desk drawer. Not today. Maybe not ever. I needed to finish what I'd started here, not because I owed anyone, but because I owed it to the girl who once slept in her car with a student ID and a cheap enamel pin. A few weeks later, I stood at the front of the lecture hall, speaking to incoming residents. "You're going to hear a lot of voices in this place," I said. "Some loud, some subtle. Most of them tell you who you should be, but the only one that matters is yours. Don't lose it." When I finished, a young woman approached me, nerves in her eyes. "Dr. Lane," she said softly, "do you think someone like me, who's made a lot of mistakes, can still be good at this?" I looked at her, really looked. She reminded me of myself. "Yes," I said without hesitation, "you can be great. Just don't forget why you're here." She nodded, and I saw the shift in her shoulders, the slight straightening that comes when someone finally believes they can do it. That night, I walked the long hallway past the ICU. My father was being discharged. He waved as I passed, but I didn't stop, not out of anger, but because the story had already changed. We were not the same people we had been when I walked into his room weeks ago, and maybe we never would be. But I didn't need an apology anymore. I had written my own ending. Back in my apartment, I pinned a new note beside my Hopkins letter. You are no one's failure. It stayed there, untouched, as a promise to myself. As the weeks turned into months, I stayed. I worked. I healed. Slowly, quietly, but fully. Sometimes, you don't need a dramatic goodbye. Sometimes, walking forward is enough. Have you ever had to rewrite your story from the ground up? I want to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments.